The thunder cracked overhead as Katherine Fairchild stood alone before three freshly dug graves, the rain soaking through her black mourning dress until it clung to her like a second skin. She didn't feel the cold anymore, not since the fever had swept through their modest homestead on the outskirts of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1885. In just 1 week, she had watched helplessly as the illness claimed her parents and little brother despite her desperate attempts to nurse them back to health. Katherine pressed a hand against her mouth to stifle a sob as the cemetery's caretaker, an elderly man with kind eyes, tipped his hat respectfully before shuffling away, leaving her to her grief. At 20 years old, she was now completely alone in this unforgiving land, with nothing but the family farm that had become more prison than home and memories that haunted every corner. The skies opened further, the downpour intensifying as if matching her despair. Lightning illuminated the darkening graveyard, revealing a solitary figure approaching on horseback. Katherine remained still, past caring about her safety. What more could fate possibly take from her? The rider drew closer, his tall silhouette becoming clearer under the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. The man dismounted with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, tying his chestnut stallion to a nearby post before making his way toward her. "Miss," his voice was deep, carrying over the sound of the rain, "shouldn't be out here in this storm, you'll catch your death." Katherine turned slowly, her blue eyes hollow with grief. "Perhaps that would be a mercy," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The stranger's expression changed as he took in the fresh graves at her feet. He removed his hat, revealing a shock of sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and hardship, though he couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "Luke Lawson, madam," he offered quietly. "I'm right sorry for your loss." Katherine nodded mechanically, her throat too tight for words. "You're the Fairchild girl, aren't you? Heard about the fever taking your folks." His eyes, a striking shade of green, reflected genuine compassion. "You got somewhere to go, any kin nearby?" "No." The single word held the weight of her entire world collapsing. Luke shifted uncomfortably, rain dripping from his duster. "You can't stay out here all night." "I have nowhere else to be," Katherine replied dully. Luke studied her for a long moment before making a decision. "My ranch is about 4 miles west of here. Got a housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway proper as they come. You can stay there tonight, get dry, have a hot meal." Katherine finally looked at him directly. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." A sad smile touched Luke's lips. "Lost my own family when I was 14. Drought took our farm, then typhoid took my parents. Neighbor took me in, taught me ranching. Man saved my life." He gestured to the storm around them. "Reckon we've all got to look out for each other out here." Thunder rolled again as Katherine considered his offer. The alternative was returning to an empty house filled with ghosts. "Just for tonight," she finally conceded. Luke nodded, replacing his hat. "My horse can carry us both back to town. I've got a wagon there, we can fetch anything you need from your place." As he helped her onto his horse and mounted behind her, Katherine felt numb with exhaustion and grief. The steady heartbeat of the stranger at her back was the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into nightmare. They rode in silence until reaching the main street of Cottonwood Springs, the rain finally letting up as they approached a wagon hitched outside the general store. "Wait here," Luke said, helping her down. "I'll be right back." Katherine stood beside the wagon, aware of curious eyes watching from storefront windows. In a town this small, everyone would know of her tragedy. The thought made her pull her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders. Luke returned moments later with a wool blanket, which he draped around her before assisting her onto the wagon seat. "Thought you might need this. Where's your homestead?" "North edge of town, the place with the blue door." Luke clicked to his horses and guided them through the muddy streets. As they approached her family's modest farmhouse, Katherine's chest tightened painfully. Just 2 weeks ago, the place had been alive with her mother's singing, her father's laughter, and her brother's constant questions about everything under the sun. "I'll wait here," Luke offered as he brought the wagon to a halt. "Take your time." Katherine moved through the silent house like a ghost, gathering only what she couldn't bear to leave behind: her mother's cameo brooch, her father's pocket watch, a few clothing items, and the small wooden horse her brother had carved under their father's guidance. Everything else seemed meaningless now. When she returned to the wagon, her meager possessions bundled in her arms, Luke helped her up without comment, understanding in his eyes. As they left town behind, Katherine stared at the receding silhouette of the only home she'd ever known. "I don't know what I'll do now," she admitted quietly. "The farm is mine, but I can't work it alone." Luke kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "One day at a time, Miss Fairchild, that's all any of us can do." The Lawson ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling property with a sturdy main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and grazing land stretching toward the distant mountains. A small creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that gave the town its name. "It's beautiful," Katherine murmured, her first genuine reaction since Luke had found her in the cemetery. "Been building it up for 10 years, Luke replied with quiet pride. "Started with nothing but that cabin over there." He nodded toward a small structure near the creek. "Now I've got 40 head of cattle, some decent horses, and enough land to keep expanding." As they pulled up to the main house, the front door swung open, revealing a plump older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "Where on earth have you been in this weather?" she called out before noticing Katherine. Her expression immediately softened. "Oh, you poor dear, come in out of this damp immediately." Luke helped Katherine down from the wagon. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Katherine Fairchild. She'll be staying with us tonight." The housekeeper's eyes widened in recognition. "The Fairchild girl. Oh, child, I heard about your family. Such a tragedy." She ushered Katherine toward the house. "Let's get you into some dry clothes before you catch your death, too." Katherine flinched at the words, but allowed herself to be led inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around her like an embrace she didn't deserve to feel. Mrs. Holloway settled Katherine in a guest room with a steaming bath and clean clothes that had belonged to Luke's late sister-in-law. "Mr. Lawson's brother and his wife lived here for a spell before moving to California," she explained as she laid out a simple blue dress. "Sarah was about your size, I'd reckon." After bathing and changing, Katherine found herself seated at a large kitchen table, a bowl of hearty stew before her. Though she had no appetite, she forced herself to eat small bites under Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye. Luke joined them shortly, having changed into dry clothes himself. He sat across from Katherine, his presence somehow reassuring despite his status as a virtual stranger. "Mrs. Holloway makes the best stew this side of the Mississippi," he remarked, trying to lighten the mood. Katherine managed a small nod. "It's very good, thank you, Mrs." Holloway bustled around the kitchen. "That fever took half a dozen families in town. Doctor couldn't do much but ease their passing." She crossed herself. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." "Mrs. Holloway," Luke interrupted gently, noting Katherine's paling face. The housekeeper caught herself. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. My tongue runs away sometimes." Katherine set down her spoon. "It's all right. It's just, I keep thinking I could have done more. Maybe if I'd gotten the doctor sooner or don't," Luke said firmly. "That path leads nowhere good. I spent years wondering the same about my folks." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Katherine felt a connection to this man who seemed to understand her pain in a way no one else could. The moment was broken when Mrs. Holloway placed a cup of tea before her. "Drink this, child. It'll help you sleep." That night, in the unfamiliar room with its comfortable bed, Katherine stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of a strange house. Sleep seemed impossible despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her family's faces contorted in pain as the fever raged through them. Near dawn, she gave up trying to rest and slipped from the bed. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she padded to the window and looked out at the star-filled sky beginning to lighten with the first hints of sunrise. "What do I do now?" she whispered to the heavens, hoping her parents could somehow hear her. "I'm not strong enough for this." As the first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the distant mountains, Katherine made a decision. She would return to her farm, gather what she could carry, and take the next stagecoach heading east. Perhaps her mother's cousin in Boston would take her in until she could find employment. There was nothing left for her in Arizona territory but pain. With this plan forming in her mind, Katherine dressed and made her way downstairs, expecting the house to be quiet at this early hour. Instead, she found Luke at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, ledgers spread before him. He looked up at her entrance. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, hesitating in the doorway. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't. I'm always up at dawn," he gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself." Katherine poured a cup and sat across from him. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Lawson, but I'll be leaving today. I've decided to go east to Boston. I have a distant relative there." Luke studied her over the rim of his cup. "That's a long journey for a young woman alone. I have no choice. I can't maintain the farm by myself, and I can't stay in a place where everything reminds me of what I've lost." Luke closed his ledger. "What if you had another option?" Katherine frowned. "What do you mean?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "I need help around here, Mrs. Holloway does what she can, but she's getting on in years. The ranch is growing, and I could use someone to manage the household, keep the books in order." He nodded toward the ledgers. "Numbers were never my strong suit. Are you offering me employment?" "I'm offering you a place to stay, work that needs doing, and fair wages." He met her gaze directly. "You've got skills, Miss Fairchild. Your father spoke highly of your education whenever he came to town." Katherine was startled. "You knew my father?" "Not well, but enough to know he was proud of his daughter who could read Latin and calculate figures faster than the bank clerk." A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. "This is a hard land for anyone alone. Maybe we could help each other." Katherine stared into her coffee cup, considering his offer. Staying meant facing her grief daily, but running to Boston meant being alone among strangers, with no guarantee of welcome from a cousin she'd never met. "I don't know," she finally said. "Take time to think on it," Luke replied, rising from the table. "I need to check on a new calf. If you'd like to see more of the ranch, Mrs. Holloway can show you around when she wakes." After he left, Katherine sat alone in the kitchen, watching the sunrise painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. For the first time since the fever had struck her family, she felt a tiny flicker of something other than despair, not hope exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. Later that morning, Mrs. Holloway gave Katherine a tour of the main house, a sturdy two-story structure with a parlor, dining room, kitchen, Luke's study, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. The furnishings were simple but well-made, with touches that surprised her. Bookshelves filled with volumes on everything from animal husbandry to poetry, colorful quilts draped over chairs, and watercolor landscapes adorning the walls. Mr. Lawson's mother was quite the artist, Mrs. Holloway explained, noticing Katherine's interest in the paintings. He kept all her work after she passed. As they stepped onto the wide front porch, Katherine spotted Luke near the corral, working with a spirited bay mare. Even from a distance, she could see his patience as he moved with a gentle authority that seemed to calm the nervous animal. "He has a way with troubled creatures," Mrs. Holloway remarked, following her gaze. "Been that way since he came here as a boy. The most wild-hearted horses settle for him eventually." "How did he acquire all this?" Katherine asked. "He mentioned starting with nothing." Mrs. Holloway's face softened with something like maternal pride. "Hard work and determination, mostly. The old rancher who took him in, Mr. Henderson, left him that small cabin and a few acres when he passed. Luke built the rest acre by acre, working other ranches to earn money for his own stock, sleeping in the barn those first few winters to save for lumber." She shook her head. "Never seen a young man so driven." As they continued their tour to the barn and chicken coops, Katherine began to understand the scope of the work involved in maintaining the ranch. By midday, when they returned to the house for the noon meal, she had made her decision. Luke joined them for lunch, the scent of horses and leather accompanying him as he washed up at the kitchen pump. "Your ranch is impressive," Katherine said as they sat down to a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold ham. "I'd like to accept your offer, Mr. Lawson." At least until I determine my next steps. Relief flickered across Luke's face. Good. We can ride into town tomorrow to collect more of your belongings and make arrangements for your property. I'd like to bring my mother's sewing machine and my books, if that's not too much trouble. Not at all. I've been meaning to bring back some supplies anyway. Mrs. Holloway beamed at them both. It'll be nice having another woman around. This house needs a younger touch. That afternoon, Katherine helped Mrs. Holloway with the mending, while the older woman explained the daily routines of the ranch. The work was a welcome distraction, keeping Katherine's hands busy while her mind struggled to adjust to her new circumstances. As evening approached, she found herself drawn to the porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and crimson. Luke appeared from the direction of the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of physical labor. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he commented, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "I've always loved desert sunsets. My father used to say God saves his best paintwork for the western skies." Luke smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "Smart man, your father," Katherine's throat tightened. He was. Noticing her distress, Luke changed the subject. "Do you ride, Miss Fairchild?" "Katherine, please," she corrected gently. "And yes, though not expertly." "Katherine, then," he acknowledged with a nod. "There's a gentle mare in the stable that would suit you. Thought you might like to use her to get around the property." The consideration behind this gesture touched her. "Thank you, that's very kind." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Mrs. Holloway called them for supper. The next morning, they set out for town in Luke's wagon, the early April air crisp but warming with the promise of spring. Katherine's emotions swirled as they approached her family's farm, grief for what was lost, guilt for what felt like abandonment, and beneath it all, a surprising undercurrent of relief to not be facing the empty house alone. Luke seemed to sense her turmoil, maintaining a respectful silence as they pulled up to the modest farmhouse with its faded blue door. "Take all the time you need," he said simply. "I'll help with the heavier items when you're ready." Inside, the house was just as she had left it, dishes still in the dry sink, her father's pipe on the mantel, her mother's shawl draped over a chair as if the family might return at any moment. Katherine moved through the rooms slowly, touching familiar objects, trying to decide what to take and what to leave behind. In the end, she gathered her clothes, books, her mother's sewing machine and quilt patterns, her father's favorite books, and her brother's small collection of carved animals. Luke loaded these into the wagon without comment, his quiet strength a comfort as they secured her family's treasures. Their next stop was the lawyer's office, where Katherine arranged for the farm to be leased to a family new to the territory. "I can't bear to sell it," she explained to Luke as they left. "Not yet." "You don't have to decide anything permanent now," he assured her. "The lease gives you time and some income." Their final errand was the general store, where Luke purchased supplies while Katherine endured the sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that followed her presence. Small towns had no secrets, and everyone knew her tragedy. As they prepared to leave town, the storekeeper's wife pressed a small package into Katherine's hands. "Your mother's recipe for sourdough starter," she explained kindly. "She always said you were the only one who could get it just right, thought you might want it." The unexpected kindness nearly undid Katherine's composure. "Thank you," she managed, clutching the package to her chest. Luke helped her back onto the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow. As they left town behind, he finally broke the silence. "Folks around here respected your family. They'll look out for the property while you're away." Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Halfway back to the ranch, they stopped by a small creek to rest the horses. Luke handed Katherine a canteen of water before walking a short distance away to give her privacy with her thoughts. Watching him check the horses' harnesses with practiced efficiency, Katherine found herself studying him more carefully. Luke Lawson was not what she had expected when he'd first approached her in the cemetery. There was a quietness to him, a steady reliability that seemed rare among the frontier men she had known, When they returned to the ranch, Mrs. Holloway helped Katherine settle her belongings in the bedroom that would now be hers. This was Mr. Lawson's sister-in-law's room, she explained. Sarah liked the morning light. Katherine ran her hand over the simple pine dresser. It feels strange, using another woman's room. Sarah's been gone 3 years now, moved to San Francisco with Mr. Lawson's brother. Mrs. Holloway placed Katherine's mother's quilt on the bed. She'd be pleased to know the room's being used again. That evening, Katherine joined Luke in his study after dinner, where he showed her the ranch ledgers and explained the accounts she would be helping to manage. "Your handwriting is nearly illegible," she remarked, flipping through pages of scrawled figures. Luke's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Told you numbers weren't my strength. That's why I need your help." For the first time in weeks, Katherine felt a sense of purpose as she reviewed the books. "You're doing well," she observed, noting the steady growth in cattle and profits, "but you could be more organized in tracking expenses." "That's what I'm counting on you for," Luke replied, seeming pleased by her assessment. Over the next few days, Katherine established a routine, rising early to help Mrs. Holloway with breakfast before the ranch hands arrived for their morning meal. After they departed for their daily tasks, she would work on organizing Luke's accounts, occasionally consulting him when he returned to the house at midday. In the afternoons, she began exploring the property, sometimes on foot, other times on Daisy, the gentle mare Luke had assigned to her use. The ranch's vastness both intimidated and exhilarated her 500 acres of land, ranging from grassy pastures to rocky outcroppings, with the creek providing water for both the house and the livestock. A week after her arrival, Luke found her sitting by the creek, watching the sunset reflect on the water. He approached slowly, giving her ample time to notice his presence. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Katherine nodded, making room on the large, flat rock where she sat. They watched the water in companionable silence for several minutes. "I used to come here when I first arrived," Luke finally said. "When the grief was too much to bear inside the cabin walls." Katherine glanced at him. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Luke considered her question seriously. "Not completely, but eventually you start having moments where you remember them without pain, just the good memories. Those moments get longer with time." His honesty was more comforting than any platitudes others had offered. "Thank you for not telling me it will all be fine soon." "Wouldn't be much point in lying to you." He skipped a stone across the water. "But I will tell you that you're stronger than you believe. I've watched you this week getting up each day, moving forward despite everything. That takes courage." Katherine blinked back unexpected tears. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions." "That's how it starts," Luke replied simply. "The motions come first, the feeling comes later." As they walked back to the house in the gathering twilight, Katherine felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Luke Lawson might be a man of few words, but the ones he chose carried weight. That night, for the first time since her family's deaths, Katherine slept without nightmares. The following morning brought unexpected visitors, the pastor from town and his wife, calling to check on Katherine's welfare. Mrs. Holloway served coffee in the parlor while Katherine answered their polite inquiries about her health and adjustment to ranch life. "We were concerned when we heard you'd left town so suddenly," Mrs. Peterson, the pastor's wife, remarked with a meaningful glance around the room. "It's quite unusual for a young woman to take up residence at a bachelor's ranch, even with Mrs. Holloway as chaperone." Katherine stiffened at the implied impropriety. "Mr. Lawson has been kind enough to offer me employment and lodging during a difficult time." Pastor Peterson cleared his throat. Of course. Luke Lawson is a respected member of our community. We just wanted to ensure you understood that other arrangements could be made if needed. The Miller family has offered to take you in." Before Katherine could respond, Luke appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Pastor, Mrs. Peterson, good of you to call." "Luke," the pastor acknowledged. "We were just discussing Miss Fairchild's situation." "Katherine is welcome here for as long as she wishes to stay," Luke said firmly. "Mrs. Holloway provides proper chaperonage, and Katherine's presence has been a blessing to this household." The certainty in his tone left no room for argument. After a few more minutes of strained pleasantries, the Petersons took their leave, promising to include Katherine in their prayers. As Luke walked them to their buggy, Mrs. Holloway sighed heavily. Tongues will wag, I suppose. Can't be helped in a town like Cottonwood Springs. Katherine felt a flash of dismay. I never considered how this arrangement might appear to others. Perhaps I should reconsider. Nonsense, Mrs. Holloway interrupted. You're doing nothing wrong, and neither is Mr. Lawson. People will always find something to gossip about. Best to ignore it and carry on. When Luke returned, his expression was apologetic. I'm sorry about that. Should have anticipated the town's reaction. It's not your fault, Katherine assured him, but I don't want to cause problems for you or damage your reputation in the community. Luke's jaw tightened. My reputation can withstand a few whispers. More concerned about yours. Katherine was touched by his consideration. Mrs. Holloway thinks we should ignore the gossip. Mrs. Holloway is usually right, Luke replied with a hint of a smile. But if you'd be more comfortable elsewhere, no, Katherine said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. I mean, I'm comfortable here. Unless you'd prefer I leave. I'd prefer you stay, Luke said quietly, their eyes meeting in a moment of perfect understanding. That evening, as Katherine helped Mrs. Holloway prepare supper, she found herself humming softly a tune her mother used to sing while kneading bread. The realization that she was engaging in such a normal activity without being overwhelmed by grief startled her into silence. Mrs. Holloway noticed the abrupt end to her humming. Something wrong, dear? I was humming my mother's song, Katherine said slowly, and for a moment I wasn't sad, I just remembered her happily. She looked up at the older woman. Is that wrong, to have moments without grief so soon, Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened. Oh, child, no, that's not wrong at all, that's healing. She patted Katherine's hand. Your family wouldn't want you drowning in sorrow forever, they'd want you to find joy again. The next morning, Katherine awoke to the sound of raised voices outside. Hurrying to her window, she saw Luke in heated conversation with a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Their body language suggested an argument, though she couldn't make out the words. Curious, Katherine dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, where Mrs. Holloway was watching the exchange through the kitchen window with a sour expression. Who is that? Katherine asked. Harold Mercer, Mrs. Holloway replied disapprovingly. Owns the bank in town and half the businesses. Been trying to buy portions of Mr. Lawson's land for years, wants to control the water rights to the creek. Outside, the conversation appeared to be ending, with Mercer climbing back into an expensive-looking buggy while Luke stood with his arms crossed, expression unyielding. When Luke entered the kitchen moments later, his face was tight with anger. Everything all right, Katherine ventured. Mercer's making another offer for the north pasture, Luke explained, accepting the coffee Mrs. Holloway poured him. Claims he's being generous, but his idea of fair price and mine differ considerably. Mrs. Holloway says he wants the water rights. Luke nodded. Creek runs through that section. If he controlled it, he could charge every rancher downstream for access. He shook his head. Not while I have breath in my body. The passionate declaration revealed a side of Luke that Katherine hadn't seen before, the fierce protectiveness of a man defending what was his. Later that day, as Katherine worked in the garden, Mrs. Holloway had started behind the house. Luke approached with a parcel in his hands. Mail came, he explained, holding out a small package. This is for you. Katherine wiped her hands on her apron, surprised. For me? Who would be sending me something? Postmark says Boston. Taking the package, Katherine recognized the handwriting immediately. It's from my mother's cousin Alina. I wrote to her after everything happened, before I came here. Luke nodded. I'll leave you to it then. No, please stay, Katherine said impulsively. I might need. I mean, I'd appreciate your perspective. Together, they sat on the garden bench while Katherine carefully unwrapped the parcel to reveal a letter and a small velvet pouch. The letter was brief but kind expressions of sympathy for Katherine's loss and an offer of a home in Boston should she wish it, along with train fare enclosed in the pouch. She seems like a good woman, Luke observed after Katherine read the letter aloud. She is. I've never met her, but she and my mother exchanged letters regularly. Katherine weighed the small pouch in her hand. "This is my way back east if I want it." Luke was silent for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" Katherine studied his face, noting the careful neutrality of his expression. "I don't know," she admitted. "A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now." She glanced around at the garden, the ranch beyond, and finally back to Luke. "Now I'm not so sure." "You don't have to decide today," Luke said gently. "Elinor's offer isn't going anywhere." Katherine tucked the letter and pouch into her pocket. "No, it isn't," she smiled tentatively. "And neither am I, at least not right away." The relief in Luke's eyes was unmistakable, though he tried to hide it. "Good, Mrs. Holloway would be devastated to lose you now that she's finally got someone who appreciates her pickling recipes." Katherine laughed a genuine sound that surprised them both. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay, for Mrs. Holloway's sake?" The teasing question hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. "No," Luke said simply, "not the only reason." Before Katherine could respond, one of the ranch hands called for Luke from the direction of the barn, breaking the moment. Luke excused himself, but the warmth of their exchange lingered long after he had gone. That evening, Katherine wrote a reply to Elinor, thanking her for her generosity, but explaining that she had found employment and accommodation at Lawson Ranch for the time being. She promised to keep the train fare safe should her circumstances change, and assured her cousin that she was being well cared for. As April gave way to May, Katherine found herself settling more deeply into ranch life. Her duties expanded beyond bookkeeping to include helping Mrs. Holloway with preserving the garden's bounty, assisting with the twice-weekly baking, and even learning to manage the household orders and supplies. On Sundays, she rode into town with Luke and Mrs. Holloway for church services, gradually becoming reacquainted with the community that had known her family. The sympathetic glances began to fade, replaced by genuine welcomes and invitations to social gatherings. Luke, she discovered, was highly respected in Cottonwood Springs, known for his fair dealings and willingness to help neighbors in need. She observed how people sought his opinion on matters ranging from livestock prices to property disputes, and how he listened carefully before offering measured advice. One particular Sunday in late May, they were invited to dinner at the sheriff's home after services. Sheriff James Miller and his wife Martha had been friends with Katherine's parents, and Martha embraced Katherine warmly upon their arrival. "It does my heart good to see color back in your cheeks," she declared, leading Katherine into their comfortable home. "How are you finding life at the Lawson Ranch?" "It's been healing," Katherine admitted. "Luke and Mrs. Holloway have been very kind." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Just Luke, is it? Not Mr. Lawson anymore?" Katherine blushed, realizing her slip. "We work closely together." The formality seemed unnecessary after a while. Martha hummed knowingly. "Well, he's a good man, Luke Lawson, one of the best in these parts, though he keeps himself too much to himself, if you ask me." During dinner, Sheriff Miller discussed recent cattle rustling incidents in the territory. "Been hitting the smaller spreads mostly, but everyone should stay vigilant. Thompson lost 15 head last week." Luke frowned. "I'll tell the hands to keep an eye out, especially for the north pasture herd. You might consider bringing those cattle closer to the main property for a while," the sheriff suggested. "That north section is pretty isolated." Katherine noticed Luke's tension at this advice. The north pasture, the same land Mercer wanted to buy, was clearly important to him for reasons beyond its monetary value. On the ride home, Katherine finally asked about it. "Why is the north pasture so special to you?" Luke glanced at her, seeming to debate how much to share. "It was the first piece I bought on my own," he finally said. "After Mr. Henderson left me the cabin and a few acres, I worked 2 years straight for neighboring ranches to save enough for that pasture." His hands tightened on the reins. "Land wasn't worth much then, too far from water, too rocky for most cattle. But I knew if I could irrigate it properly, bring water from the creek." "You transformed it," Katherine finished for him, remembering the lush green expanse she had seen on her rides. "Took 3 more years of work," Luke continued. Digging irrigation ditches by hand, clearing rocks, building fences. Every night I fell into bed too exhausted to dream." He smiled slightly. "But when that first herd grazed there, fat and happy on grass everyone said would never grow." He shook his head. "Can't put a price on that feeling." Katherine understood then that the land represented more than property to Luke. It was physical proof of his ability to build something from nothing, to overcome loss and create a future through sheer determination. "Then you can never sell it to Mercer," she said with certainty. Luke's smile widened at her vehemence. "No, madam, I cannot." The following week brought unusually heavy rains, swelling the creek beyond its banks and threatening the lower pastures. Katherine watched from the porch as Luke and his men worked tirelessly, moving cattle to higher ground and reinforcing the creek banks with sandbags. On the third day of rain, Luke returned to the house drenched and exhausted, his face gray with fatigue. "Mrs. Holloway clucked disapprovingly as she helped him remove his sodden coat. "You'll catch your death working in this weather," she scolded. "Into dry clothes with you, then straight to the fire." Katherine prepared hot coffee and stew while Mrs. Holloway fussed over Luke. When he reappeared in dry clothing, Katherine was alarmed by his flushed face and glazed eyes. "You're ill," she stated, pressing a hand to his forehead. "You're burning with fever." Luke tried to wave away her concern. "Just need to rest a bit, then get back out there." "Creek still rising near the south. The men can handle it," Katherine interrupted firmly. "You need to lie down before you collapse." Even Mrs. Holloway looked surprised at Katherine's authoritative tone, but Luke was too weak to argue further. With their combined assistance, he made it to the sofa in his study before his legs gave way. Fear clutched at Katherine's heart as memories of her family's illness surfaced. "Mrs. Holloway, we need to send for the doctor." The housekeeper nodded grimly. "I'll have one of the hands ride to town right away." While they waited for the doctor, Katherine sat beside Luke, bathing his forehead with cool cloths and encouraging him to sip water. His fever continued to climb, bringing with it delirious mumblings that tore at her heart. "Can't lose the land," promised Henderson. "Have to make it work." "SHH," Katherine soothed, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "The ranch is safe. You've built something wonderful here." His eyes flickered open, focusing on her face with difficulty. "Katherine, don't leave. Please don't go to Boston." The naked vulnerability in his plea caught her off guard. "I'm right here," she assured him, taking his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Wilson arrived just before nightfall, his examination of Luke thorough and careful. "Pneumonia, most likely," he diagnosed. "From working in the cold and wet too long without rest." "Will he recover?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor's kind eyes met hers. "He's strong, and we've caught it early. With proper care, yes, I believe he will." He left medicines and detailed instructions with Katherine and Mrs. Holloway, promising to return the following day. As Mrs. Holloway saw the doctor out, Katherine remained by Luke's side, the irony of their reversed positions not lost on her. Now she was the caretaker, fighting to keep someone she cared for from being claimed by illness. The revelation that she truly cared for Luke, that the thought of losing him filled her with a terror beyond reason, hit her with startling clarity. Somehow, in the weeks since he had found her in the cemetery, this quiet, steadfast man had become essential to her. For 3 days, Luke's condition remained precarious. Katherine and Mrs. Holloway took turns sitting with him, administering medicine, changing sweat-soaked linens, and coaxing broth between his cracked lips. Katherine spoke to him constantly during her vigils, unsure if he could hear her but needing to fill the silence with something other than his labored breathing. She told him stories of her childhood, read aloud from his favorite books, and sometimes just described the daily activities of the ranch that his foreman, Miguel, was capably managing in his absence. On the 4th night, Katherine dozed in the chair beside Luke's bed, awakening with a start when his hand touched hers. "Katherine?" His voice was weak but lucid. Joy flooded through her as she leaned forward, finding his eyes clear of fever for the first time in days. "Luke, thank God." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by every cow on this ranch," he admitted with a ghost of his usual humor. "How long have I been down?" "4 days," she replied, pouring fresh water for him. "You gave us quite a scare." He accepted the water gratefully, his hand shaking slightly. "The ranch," Miguel, "has everything well in hand. The creek has receded and all the cattle are safe." Luke nodded, relief evident in his expression. "You've been here the whole time," Catherine's cheeks warmed. "Mrs. Holloway and I have been taking turns." "The doctor said you shouldn't be left alone while the fever was high." His fingers weakly squeezed hers. "Thank you." The simple gratitude in his eyes made her throat tight with emotion. "I should fetch Mrs. Holloway. She'll want to know you're awake." As Catherine rose to leave, Luke's hand tightened on hers. "I heard you," he said softly. "While I was away, your voice, it gave me something to follow back." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes. "I just didn't want you to feel alone." "I wasn't," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed again. "Not with you here." Luke's recovery progressed steadily after the fever broke, though more slowly than he would have liked. Dr. Wilson insisted on at least a week of bed rest, followed by limited activity orders that Luke chafed against but obeyed under the stern supervision of both Catherine and Mrs. Holloway. Catherine found herself spending hours in Luke's company during his convalescence, reading to him, playing chess, or simply talking as they never had time to do before his illness. She learned about his childhood in Kansas, his journey west with his parents at 12, and the drought that had devastated their farm 2 years later. In turn, she shared stories of her own, upbringing, her father's dedication to education despite their frontier location, her mother's talents with needle and thread, and her little brother's endless curiosity about the natural world. "Thomas would have loved this ranch," she reflected one afternoon as they sat on the porch, Luke finally strong enough for short periods outdoors. All the animals, the creek to explore, he was always bringing home interesting rocks or unusual insects. "How old was he?" Luke asked gently. 10. Catherine smiled sadly. "Just beginning to be useful on the farm," Papa said, "but still young enough to see wonder in everything." Luke's hand covered hers briefly. "Children have a gift for that, seeing the extraordinary in what the rest of us take for granted." The casual touch sent warmth spiraling through Catherine's arm. These moments of physical connection between them had been increasing, a hand offered to steady her, fingers brushing when passing a book, and once, memorably, Luke tucking a stray curl behind her ear when the wind had blown it across her face. Each contact seemed to acknowledge something growing between them, though neither had put it into words. By early June, Luke had regained enough strength to resume light duties, though Catherine and Mrs. Holloway still monitored him carefully for signs of fatigue. The ranch had settled back into its rhythm, with Catherine now an integral part of its operation. On a warm Tuesday morning, Luke approached Catherine as she hung laundry in the yard behind the house. "I need to ride into town today. Would you like to come along?" "There's something I'd like to show you." "Curious," Catherine agreed, changing from her work dress into a prettier blue calico for the trip. Luke had the wagon ready when she emerged, offering his hand to help her up to the seat. In town, after completing errands at the general store, Luke directed the wagon past the main street toward a small hill overlooking Cottonwood Springs. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked. "You'll see," Luke replied mysteriously. At the top of the hill sat the town cemetery, the place where they had first met. Catherine's heart clenched as she realized their destination. Luke helped her down from the wagon, then reached back for something she hadn't noticed, a bouquet of wildflowers. "Thought you might want to visit them," he said quietly. "It's been a while." Tears blurred Catherine's vision at this thoughtful gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. Together they walked to the 3 graves, now marked with simple wooden crosses until proper headstones could be made. Catherine knelt to place the flowers, her fingers tracing the carved names of her family members. "Hello, Mama, Papa, Thomas," she said softly. "I've missed you all so much." Luke stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for this moment. Catherine spoke quietly to her family for several minutes, telling them about her new life at the ranch, the kindness shown to her by Luke and Mrs. Holloway, and how she was learning to live with her grief rather than being consumed by it. When she finally rose, wiping tears from her cheeks, Luke was waiting patiently, his own expression solemn. "Would you like to see my parents' graves?" he offered. "They're on the other side." Katherine nodded, touched by his willingness to share this personal part of his life with her. They walked together to a smaller section of the cemetery where two modest markers stood side by side. "Sarah and William Lawson," Katherine read aloud. "Beloved parents of Lucas and Richard, gone too soon but never forgotten." Luke knelt, clearing a few weeds from around the markers. "Been meaning to visit for a while, but somehow there's always something more pressing at the ranch." "Tell me about them," Katherine encouraged, sitting beside him on the grass. A smile touched Luke's lips as he began to speak of his father's booming laugh, his mother's skill with watercolors, their dreams of building a life in the West. Katherine listened, recognizing the same blend of love and loss in his voice that she felt when speaking of her own parents. "They would have liked you," Luke concluded, rising and offering her a hand up. "Especially my mother. She was always hoping Richard and I would find women with strong minds of their own." The compliment warmed Katherine more than it should have. As they walked back to the wagon, her hand still in his, Luke paused, turning to face her directly. "Katherine, I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened at the serious tone in his voice. "Yes, the offer from your cousin in Boston. Have you decided what you'll do about it?" Katherine hadn't expected this question. I haven't thought much about it lately, with your illness and everything at the ranch." Luke nodded, seeming to gather his courage. "I know you came to the ranch out of necessity, not choice, but these past weeks—" He paused, searching for words. "I've come to care for you very much." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not asking for promises," Luke continued hastily. "Just, would you consider staying, not just as an employee, but—" He exhaled slowly. "I'm not explaining this well." "You're doing fine," Katherine assured him, a smile beginning to form. "Please continue." Encouraged by her response, Luke took both her hands in his. "When I found you that day in the cemetery, all I saw was someone in pain who needed help. But now I see so much more: your strength, your kindness, your determination." His green eyes held her steadily. "I see a woman I could build a future with if she's willing." Joy bubbled up inside Katherine, unexpected and bright. "Are you offering me a new position on the ranch, Mr. Lawson?" She teased gently, a slow smile spread across Luke's face as he recognized her lightness of tone. "I suppose I am, Miss Fairchild, though this one comes with certain conditions, such as, it would be permanent rather than temporary, the hours would be considerably longer, and—" He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "It would require you to tolerate the company of a stubborn rancher who's fallen completely in love with you." Katherine's heart soared at the declaration. "Those conditions seem reasonable," she whispered, "particularly the last one." Luke's hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. "Does that mean you'll stay?" Instead of answering with words, Katherine rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a sweet, gentle kiss that conveyed everything her heart was too full to express. When they finally drew apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I'll take that as a yes." Their return to the ranch was delayed by a stop at the pastor's home, where arrangements were made for a wedding ceremony in 3 weeks' time. Mrs. Holloway's joy at their announcement was exceeded only by her immediate concerns about preparations. 3 weeks, barely enough time to plan a proper celebration, she fretted, though her beaming face belied any true displeasure. "I knew from the moment you two met that something special was happening." Word of their engagement spread quickly through Cottonwood Springs, bringing a stream of well-wishers to the ranch over the following days. The general mood was one of approval. The community had watched Katherine's journey from grief-stricken orphan to capable ranch woman, and most agreed that Luke Lawson had finally found a partner worthy of the empire he was building. Not everyone was pleased, however. Harold Mercer appeared at the ranch one afternoon, ostensibly to offer congratulations, but actually to make one final attempt at purchasing the North Pasture. "Wedding celebrations are expensive," he remarked smoothly as he sat in Luke's study. "And establishing a new household requires capital. My offer still stands at a slightly increased rate, of course, in honor of your upcoming nuptials." Luke's expression remained impassive. "The land's not for sale, Mercer, not at any price, but I appreciate your congratulations." After the banker departed, Katherine found Luke staring pensively out the window. "He'll never stop trying, will he?" she asked, joining him. "Not until someone else controls that water," Luke confirmed, "but he'll have to find another source. That creek's staying right where it is, serving this land as long as I'm alive to protect it." Katherine slipped her arm through his. "As long as we're alive to protect it," she corrected gently. "Your battles are mine now too." The days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Martha Miller and several other town women helped Katherine create a simple but elegant wedding dress using fabric from her mother's trunk, incorporating lace from her mother's own wedding gown as a special tribute. Luke, meanwhile, worked with his men to prepare the small cabin by the creek, his first home on the ranch, as a private retreat for them during their first days as husband and wife. Though they would live primarily in the main house, both felt it important to have this separate space that represented the ranch's beginnings. The evening before their wedding, Luke found Katherine sitting on the porch swing, gazing at the sunset. He joined her silently, his presence a comfort as she sorted through her emotions. "Having second thoughts?" he asked eventually, his tone light but with an undercurrent of genuine concern. Katherine shook her head. "Not about us, just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm beginning a new one with you." She turned to face him. "It feels right, but also bittersweet. I wish they could be here tomorrow." Luke nodded in understanding. "They'll be with you in spirit. And I promise you, Katherine, we'll honor their memory by building a life they would be proud of." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the surrounding hills. The ceremony took place at the ranch, under a canopy of cottonwood trees near the creek. Nearly everyone from town attended, along with neighboring ranchers and their families. Katherine walked toward Luke on the arm of Sheriff Miller, who had offered to stand in for her father. She wore her mother's cameo brooch pinned to her bodice and carried a bouquet of prairie flowers gathered that morning by Mrs. Holloway. Luke waited for her beneath an arch of twisted branches, his expression one of awe as she approached. He had never looked more handsome in his dark suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Pastor Peterson performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking of new beginnings arising from sorrow and the divine purpose evident in Luke and Katherine finding each other during their darkest moments. When the time came to exchange vows, Luke took Katherine's hands in his voice steady and sure. "Katherine, when I found you that day, standing alone in grief, I offered you shelter without knowing you would become my home. I promised to love you, protect you, and walk beside you through whatever life brings us. You've lost one family to fever, but today you've got one now with me for as long as we both shall live." Tears glistened in Katherine's eyes as she responded. "Luke, you reached out to me when I was drowning in grief and gave me reason to live again. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your joys and sorrows, and to build our dream together day by day. You've shown me that even after the darkest night, dawn always comes. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Their kiss as husband and wife was met with cheers from the assembled guests, followed by a celebration that lasted well into the evening. Tables laden with food prepared by the women of Cottonwood Springs were set up in the yard, and a local fiddler provided music for dancing. As twilight descended, Luke led Katherine away from the festivities toward the small cabin by the creek, now transformed with fresh paint, new curtains at the windows, and a profusion of wildflowers in every available container. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Luke murmured, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Katherine's heart overflowed with love as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Home," she agreed. "Finally." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Katherine rested her head on Luke's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "After losing them, I believed that part of me was gone forever." Luke's fingers traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Grief changes us," he replied softly, "but it doesn't have to define us forever." Katherine raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I love you, Luke Lawson." His answering smile was tender as he drew her down for a kiss. "And I love you, Katherine Lawson, until the end of my days." 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of the main house, watching Luke teaching their 3-year-old son William to ride his first pony in the yard. Beside her, Mrs. Holloway bounced Katherine's infant daughter Sarah on her hip, the baby's delighted giggles bringing smiles to both women's faces. The Lawson Ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Luke's breeding program had produced some of the finest cattle in the territory, and Katherine's organizational skills had helped turn their operation into one of the most successful in Arizona. Harold Mercer had finally given up his pursuit of their land after Luke, and several neighboring ranchers formed a water association that guaranteed fair access for all, while preventing any single entity from gaining control. The agreement had become a model for other communities facing similar challenges. "Mama, look," William called excitedly as the pony trotted in a perfect circle, Luke walking alongside with a lead rope. "I'm riding like Papa, I see you, darling." Katherine called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Holloway chuckled beside her. "That boy is his father all over again, same determined chin, same way of tackling everything head-on." "And Sarah has her father wrapped around her tiny finger already," Katherine added, smiling at her daughter's drooping eyelids as the baby began to succumb to sleep. "You've built something beautiful here," Mrs. Holloway observed, her voice softening with emotion. "Not just the ranch, but this family," Katherine nodded, thinking of how far they had come. The grief that had once threatened to consume her had transformed over time into a gentle sadness that visited occasionally but no longer defined her existence. Her parents and brother remained alive in her stories to her children, in the traditions she maintained, and in the values she and Luke instilled in their family. When Luke brought William up to the porch, the boy's cheeks flushed with excitement and pride, Katherine embraced them both, breathing in the scents of horse, leather, and the distinctive sage and pine essence that was uniquely Luke. "I think our son is ready for his own mount soon," Luke declared, ruffling William's dark hair. "He's a natural horseman." "Like his father," Katherine agreed, meeting Luke's eyes over their son's head. The love she saw reflected there steady, unwavering, and as essential as breathing was the foundation upon which they had built their life together. From the ashes of loss, they had created something stronger than either could have imagined alone. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Luke and Katherine walked hand in hand to the creek, their special place for quiet conversation away from the busy ranch house. "I got a letter from Richard today," Luke mentioned as they sat on their favorite boulder. "They're expecting their third child in the fall. Sarah's hoping for a girl this time." "That's wonderful news," Katherine replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Perhaps they'll finally visit us next summer once the baby is old enough to travel." Luke nodded, his arm circling her waist. "I'd like that. Been too long since I've seen my brother." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the water flow past, constant yet ever-changing, much like life itself. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Katherine asked eventually. "If you hadn't found me that day in the cemetery," Luke considered the question seriously, as he did everything. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know it couldn't have been any other way." He turned to face her directly. "Some things are meant to be, Katherine. We were meant to find each other." Katherine kissed him softly, marveling at how the years had only deepened her love for this man. "From strangers to family," she murmured against his lips. "You lost one family to fever," Luke reminded her, echoing the words he had spoken at their wedding. "But you've got one now, one that grows stronger every day." As they walked back to their home hand in hand, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. The path had begun in sorrow, but had led to a joy beyond anything she could have imagined in those dark days of grief. The lights of the ranch house glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk, a beacon of home, of family, of love that had been hard-won, but was all the more precious for the struggle. Together, they stepped into that light, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it side by side.